Ontario just slammed the door on America's dairy industry, and it wasn't a polite no, thank you. It was a $3 billion rejection in a single strike. Over 200 containers of U.S. milk, cheese, and butter were turned back at the border, as if they were nothing more than unwanted Amazon returns. And here's the shocker. Canada didn't just block the shipment. They buried it under tariffs so brutal, up to 300%, that U.S. farmers instantly found their products worth less than the cardboard they came in. In just 48 hours, Ontario didn't just protect its shelves and its farmers. It flipped the trade war script on Washington. This isn't just about milk. This is about survival, jobs, and sovereignty. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe, smash the like button, and drop your thoughts in the comments, because what happens next will stun you. Within just 48 hours of Trump's new tariffs taking effect, Ontario made a move that left Washington stunned. It rejected over $3 billion worth of U.S. dairy shipments. 200 shipping containers, packed with milk, cheese, butter, all turned around like unwelcome guests. Think about the speed of it. 2 days. That's all it took for Ontario to send a crystal-clear message. Canada's supply management system isn't negotiable. This wasn't hesitation, it wasn't bargaining, it was a full stop. And here's the difference. In America, dairy is just another commodity, a number on a spreadsheet. In Ontario and Quebec, it's identity, it's culture, it's livelihood. 89,000 jobs and $8.5 billion in GDP are tied directly to dairy. That's not something you casually put on the chopping block because your neighbor feels like dumping excess cheese across the border. Ontario's rejection wasn't chaos. It was control. Prices stayed steady. Shelves stayed stocked. Families didn't even notice the battle raging at the border. But for U.S. farmers, it was the start of a financial nightmare. And the real pain came when Canada pulled out its ultimate weapon, tariffs that can only be described as a commercial death sentence. This is where Canada's strike turned from bold to downright savage. Ontario didn't just block U.S. dairy, it slammed it with tariffs so punishing they made the shipments unsellable overnight. Here's how it works. Canada runs on something called tariff rate quotas, or TRQs. Picture it like this. Canada says, sure, you can bring us a little milk. But the moment you bring too much, we crush you. That's not an exaggeration. Once U.S. exporters crossed their limit, Canada pulled the sledgehammer. 245.5% tariffs on cheese, 298.5% on butter, 250% on yogurt, and even powdered buttermilk taxed at over 200%. These weren't fines. These were death sentences. Imagine spending millions to ship cheese across the border, only to discover it now costs triple what anyone is willing to pay. That's what Ontario did overnight. And it wasn't random. Under the USMCA trade deal, the U.S. was only allowed tariff-free access to 3.6% of Canada's dairy market. Just 3.6%. Once that line was crossed in mid-2025, Ontario made sure the punishment hit instantly. For Canadian farmers, this wasn't aggression, it was survival. For American exporters, it was financial annihilation. But the real shock wasn't just the tariffs themselves. It was what happened next, when the U.S. dairy market collapsed under the weight of Canada's retaliation. The moment those containers were turned back, the U.S. dairy industry went into freefall. This wasn't just a few gallons of spoiled milk. We're talking hundreds of tons of dairy flooding back into an American market already drowning in oversupply. And when supply explodes but demand doesn't, prices crash. Chaos erupts. Farmers pay the price. By mid-2025, the numbers were brutal. Over 37,000 American jobs lost since April. Farms in Wisconsin, the so-called dairy capital of America, collapsed like dominoes. The state had fewer than 7,000 farms still standing, and hundreds more shuttered after Ontario's rejection sent shockwaves through the market. The National Milk Producers Federation and the U.S. Dairy Export Council didn't call this a problem. They called it a crisis. Losses topped $7 billion in just 18 months. And the breakdown is staggering. $1 to $2 billion gone from canceled export contracts. $800 million wasted on storage and shipping because someone had to pay to freeze all that cheese. Nearly $1 billion more lost from dumping premium products at discount bin prices. Take Pennsylvania. One farm with 400 cows, historically stable, saw its income collapse by 28% in a single year. Why? Milk prices plunged from $17 per 100 pounds down to $12. That's $5 wiped away for every 100 pounds of milk, while costs stayed the same. Imagine milking 400 cows day and night, only to learn your paycheck just got slashed nearly a third. That's not business. That's devastation. And what did Washington do? They rolled out an $850 million aid package in May 2025. Sounds big, right? Wrong. That covered less than 12% of actual industry losses. It was a band-aid on a severed limb. For U.S. farmers, this wasn't just a tough season. It was collapse. And while their shelves overflowed with clearance cheese, Ontario's supermarkets looked untouched, as if nothing had happened. But how? How did Canada shield itself from the chaos while America drowned? That answer lies in one word: stability. While American supermarkets were buried under mountains of clearance bin cheese, Ontario's grocery stores looked normal. No chaos. No panic. Just business as usual. That's the power of supply management. Instead of letting markets swing wildly with every tariff or trade war, Canada built a system to shield both farmers and consumers. Prices stayed steady. Shelves stayed stocked. Families didn't even notice the border battle. And here's why. Canadian dairy is built on trust. Every carton of milk, every block of cheese, every liter of cream can be traced right back to the farm it came from. Growth hormones like RBSD? Banned. Imports beyond quota? Crushed under tariffs. This isn't just protectionism, it's assurance. It's also identity. In Canada, dairy farming isn't dominated by megacorporations. It's family farms, stretching from British Columbia to Ontario, each one tied into the national supply system. That blue cow logo you see on Canadian products? It isn't just marketing. It's a promise of quality, traceability, and fairness. Contrast that with the US, where rejected shipments circle the globe, get repackaged, and dumped on store shelves at bargain prices. Americans thought they were scoring deals, but in reality, many were buying products that had already been bounced like unwanted luggage from market to market. In Ontario, none of that uncertainty. Consumers knew what they were getting, and farmers knew they could count on stable income. That's why, when America's dairy industry collapsed, Ontario stood tall. Not just surviving, but thriving. But dairy was just the beginning. Because soon, this trade clash spread beyond milk and cheese into steel, aluminum, and the heart of North America's industrial economy. Dairy was only the appetizer. By July 2025, Washington decided to hit harder, this time with a 35% tariff on Canadian steel and aluminum. Not pocket change. We're talking about sectors worth tens of billions. But Canada didn't flinch. Ontario and Ottawa fired back with 50% tariffs on $22 billion worth of U.S. goods. And these weren't random consumer products. No, Canada went straight for America's jugular: Ford truck frames and electric vehicle motors. The very heart of U.S. auto manufacturing. If Trump wanted to play hardball, Canada was ready to swing just as hard. Except here's where it gets even more brutal. Canada didn't just retaliate. It future-proofed. Enter the $4.8 billion Green Steel Fund. Ontario's steel giants, Hamilton and Sault Ste. Marie, scored massive upgrades. $1.8 billion for Hamilton, $450 million for the Sioux. Their old blast furnaces being replaced with cutting-edge electric arc furnaces. Cleaner, faster, more efficient. By 2030, these plants are projected to slash emissions by 60% while keeping thousands of steel jobs secure. U.S. tariffs tried to strangle Ontario's industry, but instead Canada used the moment to modernize, making its steel cleaner, greener, and more competitive globally. In other words, while Washington was busy trying to hurt Canada's present, Ontario was busy building Canada's future. And that wasn't even the biggest power move. Because the Rail bombshell came just weeks later, when Canada broke free from decades of U.S. control over energy exports. On June 30th, 2025, Canada pulled off a move so massive it barely made headlines in Washington, but it changed the balance of power in North America. For the first time in 30 years, Canada shipped liquefied natural gas, LNG, directly to South Korea from Kitimat, British Columbia. Why does that matter? Because for decades, Canada's energy exports were trapped behind America's infrastructure. To reach Asian markets, Canadian gas had to flow through U.S. pipelines, where Washington controlled the routes, the fees, and the leverage. Canada could produce, but it couldn't freely sell. Until now. The $40 billion LNG Canada project didn't just open a port. It opened independence. Direct Pacific shipping lanes meant Canada no longer had to beg Washington to access global buyers. This wasn't just trade, it was sovereignty. And the numbers are staggering. The project is expected to deliver $23 billion in government revenue, with $5.8 billion locked in through indigenous equity agreements. That's not just cash. That's long-term security and shared prosperity. For Ontario, the ripple effect was huge. With Canada no longer chained to U.S. pipelines, energy independence shielded the entire economy from America's tariff games. Steel, aluminum, dairy, all better protected when your nation controls its own exports. America wanted to squeeze Canada with tariffs. Instead, Canada broke free from America's chokehold entirely. But here's the bigger picture. This wasn't just a series of isolated wins. It was a systematic shift, America's industries collapsing, Canada diversifying, modernizing, and expanding. And rumors suggest the next chapter of this trade war could get even uglier. Step back for a second and look at the scoreboard. On one side, America's dairy farms collapsing, $7 billion in losses and counting, tens of thousands of workers unemployed, and entire states like Wisconsin watching their lifeline disappear. On the other side, Ontario's dairy shelves untouched, farmers protected, consumers steady. In steel and aluminum, the story repeats. The U.S. slapped tariffs, hoping to choke Canada's industry. Instead, Canada retaliated harder, targeted smarter, and turned the moment into a $4.8 billion modernization plan. Washington tried to wound Canada's present, but Ottawa built Canada's future. And then the energy bombshell. For the first time in 3 decades, Canada broke free from U.S. control and opened its own Pacific energy route. That one move alone rebalanced trade power across the continent. Here's the truth nobody in Washington wants to admit. Canada is diversifying while America is shrinking. Trade with the European Union up 25%. The UK up 30%. Energy routes independent. Manufacturing future-proofed. This isn't luck. It's strategy. Meanwhile, rumors swirl that Trump is preparing more retaliatory tariffs, perhaps on Canadian autos next. But here's the irony. Canada has already insulated itself. Every punch America throws only forces Canada to innovate, invest, and expand its independence. What we're watching isn't just a trade fight over milk, cheese, or even steel. It's a full-scale rebalancing of North America. The U.S. is bleeding jobs, drowning in clearance cheese, and scrambling with bailouts that barely scratch the surface. Canada? It's stabilizing, modernizing, and quietly taking the lead. The question is no longer whether Canada can withstand U.S. pressure. The real question is, how long can Washington keep pretending it's still in control? So let's strip it down. Ontario didn't just reject milk, it rejected Washington's grip on Canada's economy. What started with $3 billion worth of dairy turned away at the border escalated into a continental showdown. Farmers collapsing in Wisconsin, steel towns in America gasping for relief, and an entire U.S. administration scrambling to save face. And yet, north of the border, shelves stayed full, prices stayed steady, jobs stayed safe. Canada not only defended itself, it used the chaos to future-proof steel, to diversify trade, and to finally control its own energy destiny. This isn't just a tariff dispute. It's a reset. The U.S. is playing whack-a-mole with short-term bailouts, while Canada is building long-term sovereignty. That's the real story. Now I'll throw it back to you. Who's really winning this trade war? Is it Trump's America, bleeding jobs and collapsing farms? Or Carney's Canada, steady, strategic, and quietly rising? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. Don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next chapter in this trade war saga. Because if the past few months have proven anything, it's this. Canada isn't just defending itself anymore. It's taking the lead.